This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. South Korea's new president launches an emergency plan to revive sluggish growth and support households while eyeing a possible call with the U.S. president. North Korea's Kim Jong Un backs Moscow and vows unconditional support in the Ukraine conflict after talks with Russia's top security chief. China, according to the International Energy Agency, maintains its record-breaking investments into clean energy, but it comes with sustained spending on highly polluting coal. Now, U.S. widens an immigration crackdown, restricting travel from a dozen countries as it suspends visas for new international students at Harvard University. Also in East Asia tonight, more Chinese parents are reconsidering sending their children to the U.S., a shift in what has long been a top choice for their studies. We'll tell you why. Revitalizing an ailing economy. South Korea's newly elected president moves to devise an emergency package in his first cabinet meeting as leader. Now, Jae-myung says that there is no time to waste in getting to work after months of political turmoil.
이 체제 정비가 명확하게 되기에는 상당한 시간이 필요한데 그 시간 동안도 우리 국민들은 어쨌든 어려운 상황에서 고생을 하십니다. 그러니까 최대한 저는 그 시간을 좀 줄이고 싶고.
Fresh off his win, Mr. Lee has so far nominated Kim Min-suk as the country's next prime minister, as well as several others as presidential aides. Against the backdrop of U.S. President Donald Trump's wide-ranging tariffs, experts say Mr. Lee faces what could be the most daunting set of challenges for a South Korean leader in decades. Well, the new president is expected to hold a phone call with Mr. Trump soon as the deadline to secure a bilateral trade deal approaches. And for more, we are joined by CNA's Lim Yun-suk in Seoul. Yun-suk, state of the economy ranks pretty high up there in the agenda. Talk us through some of the other promises made by South Korea's new leader.
Well, yes, President Lee has called this economy the most urgent concern facing South Korea. And so one of his first major moves was to put out that 30 trillion won stimulus package, and that's about 22 billion US dollars. And that's aimed at boosting growth, which has recently been revised down to 0.8%. Now, this plan is designed to jumpstart the domestic consumption, support small and mid-sized firms, and also help households still struggling with inflation. Now, the Lee administration is calling this a survival measure, not a short-term fix, but something of a long-term strategy to try and stabilize the economy. Now, President Lee and also his newly nominated Prime Minister Kim Min-suk did compare the current downturn to the 1997 Asian financial crisis, highlighting just how serious the situation was here in South Korea. Now, this morning, President Lee did hold his first cabinet meeting, but since he hasn't got his own ministers yet, he had to call in the ministers of the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Most of them had submitted their resignations yesterday, but apparently President Lee asked them to stay on, except for the justice minister, so that he could meet the legal quorum needed to hold this cabinet meeting. Now, it must have been awkward, and President Lee apparently acknowledged that when he started that meeting, telling the ministers that, it may be awkward for you, but I hope that you will be able to continue your duties because we're all here to serve the people. Now, it's unsure when he will be able to, he'll be nominating the other ministers, and many experts are saying that could take time, also because they have to go through the parliamentary confirmation hearings. Now, the meeting, the cabinet meeting reportedly lasted for about 4 hours and we had the ministers there eating lunch boxes in the room, and the presidential spokeswoman was saying that most of the time at the cabinet meeting was spent discussing the economic issues and discussing ways as to how and what they can do with this emergency package.
Yun-suk, we're also keeping a close watch on that expected phone call Mr. Lee is supposed to have with Donald Trump to address all these tariffs on South Korean exports. How different is Mr. Lee's approach from the previous government?
Well, he is in a way more direct, and it's very possible that when he has that phone conversation with the U.S. President Donald Trump, he could try to see if he could delay or at least get the U.S. not to impose those tariffs. So we are waiting to see. I mean, apparently the two sides in South Korea have been saying that he was expected to have that phone call sometime yesterday. That didn't take place. They're hoping that they can do it sometime today. But President Lee has been saying that South Korea shouldn't rush into negotiations, although that they do need to talk since that deadline for the export tariffs are coming soon, being July, the first week of July. And it could have a big impact on South Korean economy since South Korea exports most of its steel and aluminum, and those will be having those 25% import tariffs imposed on. And so experts are saying it will be crucial for President Lee to be able to persuade the U.S. President Donald Trump to somehow delay it. But he did say that South Korea should also not be one of the first countries to reach a deal. And President Lee wants to see how the other countries and what they do before South Korea jumps into any negotiations or deals with the United States.
Okay, so wait and see approach for now. Thanks so very much for that report, CNA's Lim Yun-suk live from Seoul. Now, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un has thrown his weight behind Moscow, vowing to unconditionally support Russia in all areas, including its war in Ukraine. Well, this comes after Mr. Kim met with top Russian security official Sergei Shoigu. The North Korean leader added that his country will responsibly observe the terms of the treaty between the two nations. Well, they signed a sweeping military agreement last year, including a clause for immediate mutual defense if faced with aggression. State media reported that both sides agreed to, quote, continue to dynamically expand their relations. North Korea has become one of Moscow's main allies during its more than 3-year offensive in Ukraine, sending thousands of troops to support the Kremlin. Meantime, a North Korean analyst commenting on state media KCNA has criticized French President Emmanuel Macron for comments he made during a speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue on Pyongyang's alliance with Moscow. Well, the leader a week ago had suggested that security alliance NATO could be involved in Asia if China does not further press the Russian ally to keep its forces out of the war in Ukraine. Well, the analyst denounced Mr. Macron's speech as, quote, shocking claptrap. The commentary goes on to suggest Mr. Macron aims to disguise what it calls NATO's aggressive and wicked intention to expand its footprint into the Asia-Pacific region. It described the French leader's comments as unrealistic assertions and added that self-assured France is unable to properly judge the situation. Well, separately, South Korea says its Coast Guard has picked up 4 North Korean nationals after their wooden boat drifted past an inter-Korean maritime border into the South's waters last week. Now, this incident took place some 100 kilometers east of Gosong City in Gangwon Province last Tuesday. The 4 individuals were questioned and are believed to have crossed the boundary by accident. All have expressed their intention to return to the north. Well, the latest maritime border crossing comes nearly 3 months after 2 North Koreans were found on a wooden boat in the Yellow Sea. Seoul says it has tried to repatriate the 2 individuals, but North Korea has not responded to any of its communications. The Chinese embassy in the Philippines has slammed the European Union for its perceived interfering in the South China Sea. It says that the bloc is not a party to the ongoing dispute between Beijing and Manila. Beijing urges the EU to respect China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights, warning it to stop provoking trouble. It also advises the Philippines not to, in its words, fantasize on relying on external forces to resolve the dispute, and calls for dialogues instead to resolve their differences. Well, the remarks were in response to Brussels and Manila agreeing to establish a security and defense dialogue just days ago. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallas was in the Philippine capital for talks with Foreign Minister Enrique Manalo, where she voiced concerns over China's activities in the waterway. Ms. Kallas reiterated that the bloc remains committed to a rules-based order and rejects the use of coercion. The new partnership between the 2 sides seeks to deepen defense cooperation and resolve issues that they deem as emerging security threats. China has put more than 20 suspects on its wanted list, accusing them of participating in cyber attacks allegedly launched by Taiwan. Taipei has strongly rejected those claims. Chinese officials have offered bounties for information leading to each suspect's arrest. Chinese authorities in Guangzhou accused Taiwan of organizing and planning attacks on several government sectors, including the military, with regions such as Hong Kong and Macau also affected. State media Xinhua, citing a cybersecurity report, said that Taiwan has cooperated with U.S. anti-Chinese forces to sway public opinion and conduct cognitive warfare against China. A senior Taiwan security official Reuters spoke to suggested that Beijing was trying to shift the spotlight away from European scrutiny over Beijing's own hacking activities. Guangzhou authorities last week said that a tech company linked to the Taiwanese government was behind the cyber attack. They added that Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party supported the organization. However, it's unclear how the bounties would have an impact on the suspects, as Chinese legal bodies have no jurisdiction over Taiwan. Time now for a break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China Caixin PMI shows growth in the services sector, accelerating in May in an environment of improved business confidence. And Nintendo releases its widely anticipated Switch 2 console. Details in a short bit. Hello again. Time now for your business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, it seems like China is keeping its record investments into renewables, but the International Energy Agency has also flagged a concerning trend in coal. So, what's that all about?
Well, Telly, 2024 is a milestone year for clean energy investments in China. Now, its spending on renewables almost doubled since 2015, reaching more than $625 billion last year. China also achieved its solar and wind capacity targets in 2024, 6 years ahead of schedule. But the IEA has noted that in its flagship report, that's the World Energy Investment Report, that the growth may have slowed this year. A major factor being policy shifts, including China's move to market-driven renewable energy pricing. Now, that change would bring an end to its fixed pricing system, a measure that had attracted much investment into the country's clean energy sector for years. Mounting pressure on China's economy, also another influential aspect. Recent government reports have hinted that substantial effort would be needed to revitalize the economy, indicating that focus may be shifting to ensure power security to meet domestic demand. The IEA report has suggested that these priorities may manifest into two trends. Firstly, a push to grid, storage, and smart infrastructure. Recent heat waves and demand spikes have exposed the country's weakness in that area. Secondly, a continued expansion in coal. China's spending into coal power generation is expected to exceed some $54 billion this year. The IEA report noted that the scale of investments pointed to the country's deeper reliance on thermal power, largely due to persistent concerns over electricity security. Although the International Energy Agency has also forecasted that the global spending into fossil fuels will fall this year. Now, that's the first drop projected since the COVID-19 crisis in 2020. The decline is mostly led by a contraction in the oil sector, where there's a sharp drop in prices, forcing firms to reassess spending plans. The Bank of Korea has warned that South Korea's economy is showing increasing signs of similarities with Japan's stagnation seen following its asset bubble era in the late 1980s. The central bank has flagged the country's mounting private sector debt as one of its chief concerns in the report titled Lessons to Reflection from the Japanese Economy. South Korea's private sector debt in 2023 showed that the figure is close to Japan's peak level during the bubble era. Now, when that price bubble collapsed, Japan's banking system was destabilized, leading to a prolonged stagnation that lasted for decades. Bank of Korea has cautioned that South Korea may follow suit and called for the tight control of debt levels, as well as swift structural reforms. The central bank also noted both South Korea and Japan are dealing with similar demographic challenges, low birth rates, and an aging population. To address them, the BOK has urged for measures that encourages those outside the domestic workforce to participate and sustainable ways to utilize foreign labor. Crystal Tan from ANZ analyzes the measures the Bank of Korea has taken and what else it can do to revive South Korea's economy.
So the Bank of Korea so far in the current cycle has already lowered its policy rate by 100 basis points since October. And this will be helpful for the economy, right? Korean economy is quite highly leveraged. Lower interest rates will ease debt servicing burdens. And messaging last week was still pretty dovish. There is still scope for further rate cuts. If you look at inflation, that's pretty well contained. The May print just came in 1.9%, just under the central bank's 2% target. So on that front, there is certainly more scope for policy easing. But at the same time, I think there are reasons to expect that the pace of easing from the Bank of Korea could slow from here. So if fiscal stimulus is going to be expanded, that does reduce the burden on the Bank of Korea to do the heavy lifting in terms of supporting growth. And also, the Bank of Korea does have other concerns as well, like financial stability risk is something that they are watching. They are concerned about the rise in housing prices and the potential for lower interest rate to reignite a housing boom.
Greater China markets ending higher as investors kept one eye on trade negotiations between Beijing and Washington. Now, you remember, President Trump yesterday called China's Xi Jinping tough and extremely hard to make a deal with, ahead of an expected phone call between the two leaders this week. On the mainland, Shanghai Composite ending day 0.23% higher, second Boer Shenzhen up by nearly 0.6%, while Hong Kong was up nearly 1%, led by tech and AI shares. Data out this morning showed that China's services activity expanded at a slightly faster pace in May. But new export orders declined amid uncertainty from U.S. tariffs. The Caixin Services PMI rose to 51.1 from 50.7 the previous month. It remains above the 50-point mark, which marks expansion. Paul Gambles, co-founder of MBMG Group, explains why policymakers believe that the Chinese economy is headed in the right direction.
The key thing is always to look at Chinese policymaker reactions, and the market's always looking for, a big positive response from policymakers. So far, we haven't seen that. We actually find it reassuring because we think that Chinese policymakers probably have the best take on their domestic economy out of any of the major central banks and finance ministries. So the fact that we haven't seen any panic measures from China tells us that things are actually holding up okay. Yes, this is slow. We are still hovering around that 50 level, but the fact that we haven't seen any dramatic overreactions from Chinese policymakers, it tends to make us think that they think everything is still not great, but okay, heading in the right direction. And despite all the craziness of the Trump tariffs, which you've got to remember, for Chinese suppliers, it's a bit like somebody constantly sort of turning an on-off switch between both settings, and that's a really difficult thing to measure on a monthly basis. Monthly PMI are perhaps no longer the great insight that they were. We probably need to start looking at slightly longer trends to actually really understand where China is, because 1 month just again, Chinese manufacturers are reacting to Donald Trump's rhetoric exactly the same that markets are.
The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, has taken a step forward to tighten regulations on foreign firms listed on U.S. stock exchanges. Wall Street's top regulator unanimously voted to seek public comments on possible rules that would limit the definition of foreign companies, which are only required to publish annual reports and occasional updates. It's a move that threatens to make entering U.S. equity markets more costly and challenging. The SEC said that many Chinese firms have benefited from the current regulations, unlike U.S. firms that are subject to the full scope of America's securities laws. China, however, has responded with the foreign ministry saying that it will protect the rights and interests of Chinese companies and calling on the U.S. to abide by fair competition and to avoid politicizing economic issues. Suzuki is the first Japanese car maker reportedly affected by China's rare earth restrictions, according to a Nikkei report. It stopped the production of the Swift subcompact model from late May through to tomorrow, citing a shortage of components. It joins a list of Western automakers already hit by shortages of rare earth metals after China, the dominant supplier, suspended shipments in April. Citigroup says it'll reduce its tech headcount in China by about 3,500 staff as it seeks to streamline its global tech operations in order to improve risk and data management. The affected staff will be from Citi's Shanghai and Dalian solution centers, and the group expects the layoffs to be completed by the fourth quarter. The bank added that some of the roles will be moved to the group's other technology centers, but did not specify the number of jobs and locations. Nintendo has released its highly anticipated Switch 2 console today, drawing lines long before opening hours in what some are calling the biggest gadget launch in years. Nintendo says it received more than 2 million applications for a chance to get hold of the console on launch day in Japan, leading some fans to hunt around different stores for a unit.
応募したんですけど外れちゃって全部落ちて買えなくて先着のお店も掲示板とかであったけど買えなくてもういろんなとこ応募してやっと1個だけ当たったのがこのビッグカメラ池袋店だった。
Nintendo forecasts to sell some 15 million Switch 2 units this financial year on top of 4.5 million for the older Switch model. The launch comes amid disruptions to global supply chains brought on by Trump's tariffs. But an analyst says Nintendo has taken steps to insulate itself from uncertainties.
Nintendo, like all other companies, are exposed to the uncertainties around tariff and other kind of geopolitical things happening in the world. Nintendo has been very clever and since 2019 has made big steps to diversify its supply chain and its manufacturing beyond China. And the idea has been to, as I mentioned, kind of protect themselves from these uncertainties that can affect one particular country.
And despite the high demand, Nintendo shares ending the day, well, just shy of 2% lower. And that'll do it for Business News. Atali.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, we are going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump widens his immigration crackdown, imposes a travel ban on a dozen countries, including Myanmar. And the American leader separately signing a proclamation restricting foreigners seeking student visas to study at Harvard University. Details in a moment. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea's new president, Jae-myung, holds his first cabinet meeting on reviving the country's economy and presiding over top officials largely put together by his predecessor, Yoon Suk-yeol. A North Korean leader, Kim Jong Un, has thrown his weight behind Moscow, vowing to unconditionally support Russia in all areas, including its war in Ukraine. His comments come as he meets top Russian security official Sergei Shoigu. And the U.S. has announced a travel ban as President Donald Trump widens his immigration crackdown. The leader has signed a proclamation restricting travel from 12 countries. From Monday, the U.S. will fully restrict and limit the entry of nationals from countries deemed to pose a very high risk, including Afghanistan, Myanmar, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. President Trump says the move is to protect America from foreign terrorists and other national security threats.
In the 21st century, we've seen one terror attack after another carried out by foreign visa overstayers from dangerous places all over the world. And thanks to Biden's open door policies, today there are millions and millions of these illegals who should not be in our country. In my first term, my powerful travel restrictions were one of our most successful policies, and they were a key part of preventing major foreign terror attacks on American soil.
Well, it will also partially restrict and limit the entry of nationals from 7 countries who pose a so-called high-level risk to the U.S., such as Laos and Venezuela. The proclamation details exemptions for those with existing visas. Mr. Trump says new countries could be added to the list as threats emerge around the world. Well, the White House says countries facing the total ban were found to be deficient with regards to screening and vetting. It was also deemed that they pose a very high risk to the U.S. During his first term in office, Mr. Trump banned travelers from 7 majority Muslim nations, a policy that went through several iterations before it was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2018. And Nick Harper tells us if we can expect more drastic measures from President Trump in the wake of this latest travel ban.
I think what we are seeing playing out and have done over the last few weeks is Donald Trump making it very clear that there are certain types of people, not just around the world that he doesn't want entering the United States, but people who are already in the United States that he now wants to expel. We talked about that travel ban back in 2017. That was large. This travel ban will be even larger. But he's also been, over the course of the last 4 months that he's returned to office, expelling illegal migrants from the country, deporting them to other countries, often third countries, not even the country that they originate from. We've seen them being sent to mega jails in El Salvador, to other places like Mexico, Colombia, even South Sudan. And now, in the course of the last few days, and as motivation for this latest travel ban, he is targeting terror suspects. He said, as we heard in that clip just a moment ago, that attack in Boulder, Colorado at the weekend, when a group of people who were marching in support for Israeli hostages were targeted by a man with a flamethrower who is now facing hate crimes. This has motivated him now to put this travel ban in place. He wants to remove those terror suspects from the United States, and we're even told that family members of terror suspects could be deported. And in Marco Rubio's words, the Secretary of State, terrorist sympathizers would also be thrown out of the country. Donald Trump very much cracking down on the type of people he wants to be in the United States, and very clearly drawing that dividing line to the people who can be here and the people who can't.
Well, that's not all. The U.S. leader also signed a proclamation suspending visas for new international students at Harvard University for an initial 6 months. Well, the document, which has since prompted China's opposition, cited what the White House says are crime, anti-Semitic incidents, as well as what it calls concerning foreign ties, such as the developing of extensive relations with what the administration considers foreign adversaries. It noted the university received funds worth more than $150 million from China alone. It also said that the university hosted paramilitary members from the Communist Party of China and partnered with individuals who could help advance China's military modernization. The document noted that Harvard is seen as top school for the CPC, with Chinese leader Xi Jinping's daughter among those who have studied there. Well, the proclamation could also lead to the revoking of visas for existing international students. It's the latest in the administration's tussle with the Ivy League school to force it to comply with its demands. Tony Waterman has more on its impact on the student population.
It's the rush before the rush. Staff at Grendel's Den are prepping for the lunchtime crowd. This pub has been a staple in Harvard Square for more than 50 years, started by Carrie Coulter's parents.
I used to go around and literally crawl around on the floor picking up change that the waitresses had dropped and then bringing it over to them to say, you dropped this, here's your money.
But it's change of a different sort that now has this second-generation pub owner worried. The Trump administration has engaged in a very public feud with Carrie's neighbor, Harvard University. President Donald Trump claims the school has allowed anti-Semitism to flourish on campus and discriminates in its enrollment and hiring practices, accusations Harvard vehemently denies. The president has frozen billions of dollars in federal funding to the university and is trying to bar Harvard from enrolling international students. That could impact nearly 6,800 people, about a quarter of Harvard's student population, students who go out to eat at restaurants like Grendel's Den. Carrie says they account for a third of her business.
where are we going to get those dollars? They're not going to just magically materialize. There's no untapped market.
Do you think that the Den can survive without international students?
I don't know.
It's a question Denise Gilson is grappling with, too.
We like to say that it's been a destination since 1630.
She's the head of the Harvard Square Business Association, which advocates for more than 300 individual storefronts, most of which are locally owned one-off establishments, without other locations to offset losses. Students are the bloodline of their very existence.
How are businesses preparing for the possibility of fewer students?
The kinds of things that they did during COVID, I suspect they will employ the same applications. So reduction of staff, reduction of hours, less choices on the menu. But the difference between COVID and this is that there were government subsidies during COVID. We don't have that safeguard now.
While a judge has temporarily blocked Trump's efforts to end foreign student enrollment, it's seen as only a short reprieve as the net widens beyond Harvard's walls. U.S. embassies have been ordered to halt visa interviews for all international students, not just the ones here at Harvard University, as officials mull stricter vetting procedures. The Trump administration also says that it will aggressively revoke the visas of certain Chinese students. That could impact colleges and universities across the country who educate more than 1 million international students every year, students that pack a massive economic punch. They added $44 billion to the U.S. economy last year alone, spending on everything from tuition and housing to food and entertainment. That economic contribution also extends to the labor market, as Boston University professor Barnett Sherman explains.
Roughly one job in the U.S. is created for every 3 international students. That's over 350,000 jobs nationwide. And these are not just jobs in larger urban centers like Boston, but across the country, because nearly every city and town across America has a school, either a community college or a local state college. And there are a lot of international students coming to those schools.
And since foreign students often pay full tuition, they're a vital revenue stream for schools faced with declining domestic enrollment, which, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, fell 15% between 2010 and 2021. But experts like Professor Sherman say foreign students' economic contributions last much longer than their college years.
25% of the billion-dollar companies on the stock exchanges were started by international students. So the implication is it's not just the money that is potentially being lost now, but the multiplier effect of this money over time and the number of jobs and wealth that international students have created and will continue to create.
In Harvard Square, business owners know that firsthand. They also know that if Harvard is forced to shut its doors to foreign students, the fabric of this community will be altered in ways beyond financial. Tony Waterman, CNA, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Well, Western English-speaking countries, especially the United States, have long been top choices for Chinese parents seeking overseas education for their children. While this remains largely true, there has been a subtle shift amid rising geopolitical tensions, as CNA's Tan Yu-Guan finds out.
Red cat and blue cat lived in the same house.
Even at lunchtime, Yo-Yo isn't forgoing the opportunity to help her son Sunny to master English.
Are you trying to be like me? asked Blue Cat. Maybe.
无论是欧美啊，还是日本、东南亚，都可以用英语作为你的交流语言。英语都是一个很通用的语言，所以我希望他能好好学英语。无论是未来的工作，或者你出去旅行，或者出去干嘛，我觉得英语都很重要。包括我们有时候在超市其实购物，它很多后面的那一些介绍都是用英语写的。
English is a compulsory school subject in China. Yet, only a small fraction of Chinese citizens in the country can speak it fluently. This makes English proficiency a competitive advantage and a business opportunity for foreign education outfits. One academy, for example, teaches math and science in English based on Singapore's curriculum. Many of these children are here as a prelude to what their parents see as a way to stay ahead of the academic rat race in China.
Basically, if you look at statistics, roughly about last year, about 1.5% of the Gaokao students, which is about 240,000 students, went into the top university in China, the top 39 university in China. And the other 40% goes to the normal university in China. So basically you're looking at about 60% that goes on a vocational route for these people. So it's actually very competitive.
Parents are also concerned about the relatively high unemployment rate among youths. Currently, about 3 in 20 youth between 16 and 24 are unemployed.
A lot of these parents, again, also worry about the employment prospects of their child. They want the best for their child. They want, some of them are even, in their words, they want to change the stars for their child. So a lot of them, from the get-go, they'll start to tell us, I'm sending my kid overseas.
My name is Lika. I'm 24 years old.
Lika speaks fluent English. After all, she did her high school in Toronto, Canada. But her story illustrates a key concern for Chinese parents sending their children abroad. A year into her undergraduate studies in Montreal, Lika was assaulted in broad daylight.
So after that, I just didn't feel safe anymore living alone there. So it left me with a kind of like mental trauma. So I was only like 17 at that time. The legalization of marijuana also makes the city more unsafer to me. So this is also another big factor.
Lika packed her bags and moved to Japan to continue her university studies, even though she barely knew Japanese then. Lika's move reflects the findings of a 2024 paper released by an agency under China's Education Ministry. Between 2020 and 2023, the share of returnees with overseas degrees from Asia increased from 22% to nearly 31%. In contrast, those returning from North America decreased from nearly 26% to 19%. This comes as Sino-US ties worsen and concerns over safety rises. So while Yo-Yo's been supporting Sunny in his interest in ice hockey, she isn't looking to send him to North America, where the sport is most popular. But she isn't keeping him in China either. With the goal of giving her son that competitive edge in life, Yo-Yo too is sending Sunny overseas. Sunny is now enrolled in an international school in Singapore. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
For more coverage on issues international students could face in the U.S., do log on to our website, cna.asia, as well as our mobile app for commentaries such as this one on how Washington may have hurt its own interests by revoking visas. Well, up next on East Asia tonight, Japan assembles a top-level committee to look into the root causes of the country's soaring rice prices and find a possible fix. And a Japanese startup is counting down to its second attempt at a moon landing. Japan has put together a high-level task force to deal with the nation's rising rice price predicament. The state broadcaster NHK says that Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba himself will be heading the task force. Now, part of the task force's duties will be to probe the reasons behind the rising prices and the government's handling of the crisis. This is the latest in a series of moves by the Japanese government to address high rice prices. Just last week, Agriculture Minister Koizumi Shinjiro sold stockpiled rice through no-bid contracts. That's a first for the nation. Well, hundreds queued for hours at retailers in an effort to secure the permitted one bag per household.
やはり今までぐらい上がる前ぐらいの値段になってくれればいいかなと思って、それは小泉さんに期待してます期待するしかない。
NHK quotes Mr. Koizumi as saying at the task force meeting that they will discuss the factors that led to the price surge. Guatemalan President Bernardo Arevalo is on a visit to Taiwan, where he reaffirmed his country's support for the island. A ceremonial welcome had to be cancelled due to wet weather, but a 21-gun salute went ahead to welcome Mr. Arevalo's convoy. The Central American country is one of only 12 to have official ties with China, claimed Taiwan. Beijing has in recent years stepped up efforts to win over the island's allies to its side. President Arevalo, in his first visit to the island since taking power last year, said his people will walk together with their, quote, brothers in Taiwan.
En donde profundizamos y ampliamos nuestros vínculos para llevarlos a un nuevo nivel, ampliando la relación económica, desarrollando la alianza comercial y estableciendo un proceso de inversión de beneficio para ambos países.
我们两国虽然地理相隔遥远，但双方人民的理念与价值紧密相连。相信在阿联瓦洛总统的支持之下，双边的交流合作会更加紧密多元，写下更好的篇章。
Meantime, Taiwan has sought to burnish its green energy credentials in recent years, building renewable energy sources ranging from solar power plants to wind farms. But outcomes haven't always been optimal. The presence of wind power and other renewable energies come at a price for Taiwanese fishermen trawling the waters of Yulin for generations. Well, they say these disrupt their livelihoods.
今天它做下去的时候，变成对我们影响最大的。第一，在捕捞的时候那一种财损不断的增加；第二，他们的维护，因为一旦维护出动到潜水人员，我们就会避开，就会打扰到我们本来每天固定，只要好天气固定在作业。
Concerns are also mounting about the risk of pollution from the wind turbines themselves, primarily oil leaks. And making matters worse, a lack of communication from the government on this very issue has also led to an increase in complaints.
延伸出来的这些产物对我们水产生物的影响，其实我们渔民没有办法去做到检测这个动作。当然了，我只能等他们来找我洽谈，说要怎么办的这样子啊，我也很无奈啊。哎呀，毕竟整年的心血都在这里，都投入进去了。
Such installations will only increase as Taiwan aims to ramp up its renewable power generation sources to at least 60% by the year 2050. Energy companies, in the meantime, are looking at ways to improve ties with affected communities.
每个项目只要刚刚开始的时候，大家都会有一些英文来说的 surprise 啊，就是不知道到底会发生什么事情，对我有什么影响，对吗？所以就是说沟通开始的时候，应该我可以说希望可以做得更好，但是我们肯定做得不够好，所以就开始就会有一些冲突。然后接下来就是我们大家就是很认真的反映出来说，我们碰到的问题，我们都要很认真的要去解决，要去面对，不是要逃避哦。
Now, time for some headlines from other media outlets in East Asia. Hong Kong Free Press says the city's police have charged a man with 4 counts of making hoax bomb threats. A 35-year-old Chinese national has been denied bail and will be remanded in custody. He was arrested on Monday along with 4 women who were also said to be promoting the idea of independence for both Hong Kong and Taiwan. Nikkei Asia reports that the arrest of 2 Chinese nationals over the smuggling of a fungus that could cause major damage to crops have prompted calls to revive the China Initiative, a measure during the first Trump administration to prevent industrial espionage. Well, that program was cancelled by the Biden administration over racial discrimination concerns. And Kyodo News reports that the Japanese imperial family visited a national cemetery in Okinawa to pay respects to the war dead. Well, this visit was made ahead of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, when Japan surrendered to the Allied forces. After the trip, the family emphasized the hardships the war caused and renewed their wish for peace. A Japanese company, iSpace, is on track to land a private spacecraft on the moon. If successful, it will become the first non-US company to achieve a controlled landing. The Resilience lander, the second lunar probe by iSpace, is targeting a touchdown in the northern part of the moon. It has been in lunar orbit for almost a month. Well, if all goes well, it could touch down in about 8 hours' time at 4:24 a.m. Japanese time on Friday. The touchdown location is a flat region called Mare Frigoris, or Sea of the Cold. Should iSpace Mission Control decide against the planned landing, it has two other options, but those attempts would take place on different days and times. The planned move comes about 2 years after the company's first failed attempt. Well, the probe back then experienced a hard landing as it ran out of fuel due to an altitude miscalculation. The Chinese men will take on Indonesia in a do-or-die World Cup qualifier in about 3 hours. The team representing Beijing is at risk of not qualifying, and only victory will do. This is only the second time in the team's history that China might fail to qualify for the Men's World Cup. In the previous qualifier, China lost to Saudi Arabia despite wins against Indonesia and Bahrain. The top two teams from the three Asian qualifying groups will qualify for the World Cup, while teams finishing third and fourth go into another round of qualifying. Well, China is at the bottom of the 6 teams in Group C with 2 games to go. The team is level with Bahrain on 6 points, but 3 behind Indonesia in the crucial 4th spot. And just before we go, some news from the world of K-pop. Boy band Super Junior will release their 12th album in early July. Now, this comeback marks their 20th anniversary since their debut in 2005. As such, the album will be titled Super Junior 25 in a nod to their first album, titled Super Junior 05. Well, the new album will feature 9 tracks, and no other details have been released by the group's agency SM Entertainment. Since their debut in 2005, Super Junior has gained popularity for hits such as Sorry Sorry and Mr. Simple. And that's all we've got for you on East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube as well. Thanks for watching.